I'm Joyce Maynard.
How's that?
I'm so pleased to be here with you. And I'm going to be having a conversation with my good friend, native Floridian and poet and editor, Elizabeth Colledge from Jacksonville. And really, I so love the talking with you part and the talking with you part that I don't want to spend a lot of time on reading. But I wanted to give you a very small taste of my most recent novel. It's my 10th. It's called Count the Ways. And basically, the only thing you need to know as a setup for this short scene is that my protagonist, my central character, Eleanor, is a recently divorced mother of 3 who's on an off year. Her children are off with their father for Christmas. So she decided to address the situation of being alone on December 25th by having a blind date with a man from the Personals. Russell's sons answered the door. The older one wore thick glasses and the kind of haircut a boy gets when his father, economizing, tries to cut it himself, a bowl cut. He was very thin, his pants held up, but just barely, by a fake leather belt. He was wearing a clip-on Christmas tie that lit up when you pushed a button, which he did. The smaller brother was only slightly less thin, no glasses, but when he stepped forward to greet her, she saw that he had some form of cerebral palsy, mild but recognizable. "I'm Arthur," the older one told her. "This is my brother, Benny. His umbilical cord was tangled up around his neck when he was born. That's why he walks a little funny. He's not retarded or anything." This was old news to Benny. He paid no attention to the health report. "We bought a turkey," he said. "Usually we go to the Ramada for Christmas, but my dad said since we were having company, we'd make a feast at home." "We got 2 kinds of dip," Arthur added. Someone had decorated the entrance with a Merry Christmas sign and a cutout of Santa in a disco outfit. Eleanor would not have noticed if the older brother, Arthur, hadn't pointed this out, but they had hung a bunch of mistletoe from the ceiling. "Stand here, okay?" Benny said. "That means my dad gets to kiss you." His speech was a little difficult to understand, but Eleanor figured out what he was saying. Until now, she had not actually laid eyes on her host, but now she saw him, standing a little uneasily a few feet behind his sons, a pale man of average height and narrow, sloping shoulders, wearing a red and green sweater with a reindeer on the front and a bow tie. He had a regretful air about him, as if he already knew he was a disappointment, but maybe his sons would win her over. "Don't worry," he said. "I wasn't going to do anything like that. The boys are just excited you're here." Benny led her in, the picture coming to mind of Ricardo Montalban's small sidekick, Tattoo, on Fantasy Island, escorting that week's guest stars off the plane and down the plank leading to the island. Russell was no Ricardo Montalban, but he had clearly worked hard to set the stage for her arrival. There were carnations on the table, and though it was daylight out, candles already lit. He had a record playing, the Carpenters' Christmas Portrait. Russell asked how her drive had gone. Arthur asked what kind of car she had and concealed his disappointment when she told him, "Subaru." "My brother really loves Dodge Chargers," Benny told her. "He was hoping you had one, but that's okay." Russell had bought wine, and now he poured her a glass, red, a little sweet. "I'm not really much of a drinker," he said, "but it's a special occasion." Eleanor handed Russell the pie she'd made. The boys gathered around to admire it, as if what she had brought were a rare and exotic treasure. This may have been their first homemade pie. "You're pretty," Benny said. "We were talking about it before you got here, since we didn't know what you look like. Arthur said, the important part is if you're nice, but it's an extra bonus when someone's pretty." He turned to Arthur. "Doesn't Eleanor look like that girl on the commercial for 7-Up, the one with the brown hair?" He spoke her name. "Not everyone you met did that." Arthur gave Benny a look. "Don't mind my brother," he said. "He's a little crazy." "Not really," Russell said. Maybe he was worried she'd believe this. Also, he didn't want to hurt Benny's feelings. She had only been in their apartment 5 minutes, but already she understood this. Russell was looking for a wife. Even more, Russell's sons wanted a mother, and he would do what he could to find them one. If she were up for it, the two of them could be married by Valentine's Day, probably. "Do you have kids?" Benny asked. 3. "They're with their father today." A worried look came over Benny. Maybe she was another one of those mothers like his own who had left. "We haven't seen our mom since I was a baby," he said. "It turned out we weren't her cup of tea. She wanted to ride around listening to the Grateful Dead." "There was probably more to it than that, Benny," Russell said. "Your mother loved you. She just had some problems being a mom." "Do you have problems being a mom?" Benny asked Eleanor. She told him she didn't. She could have said more, but this was not the moment.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Well, it's wonderful, as always, to be with you, Joy.
It is.
And I'm looking forward to this chat today.
Elizabeth is a longtime friend and has been a writing student of mine.
Yes, I've had the great privilege to have been to Joyce's workshop, her week-long workshop in Guatemala, which was a life-changing experience. And I've loved every minute of it. Well, let's just jump right in with the title of this talk, Shameless Oversharing. And perhaps we can talk about the limits of openness. Now, most of us are familiar with the writer Karlove Knausgård, who in 9 lengthy volumes of Oversharing goes into incredibly graphic, shocking details of his father's alcoholism, his wife's recurrent mental illness, not to mention documenting every drag of a cigarette and sip of coffee he has.
And trip to the bathroom.
Yes. Oh, gosh, yes. However, in a 2007 article in the Atlantic Monthly, Caitlin Flanagan excoriates Joyce for what Caitlin considers Joyce's excessive personal confessions. Is this an issue of gender bias? Joyce, I'd like you to address this, and also, what do you consider the boundary line between openness and oversharing?
Well, I don't know what undersharing is. First of all, I'll say I think it's a bit of a problem to undershare. It can lead to some issues. You know, I'm a little bit of a poster girl for this supposed problem. And I want to tell a story that connects, I think, to your question, Elizabeth, which has to do with the only other time I have spoken at this festival, and it was 23 years ago, following the publication of my memoir, At Home in the World. As some of you may know, and it's fine if you don't, At Home in the World was, it's sometimes portrayed as the book about J.D. Salinger. I have no business writing a book about J.D. Salinger, but I contend that I have all the business in the world writing a book about my experiences in life, one of which was that when I was 18 years old and writing and publishing my work already, I received a series of enormously powerful, irresistible and seductive letters, not so much sexually seductive, emotionally seductive, from J.D. Salinger, who even then was famously reclusive in his early 50s. I was 18. That caused me to drop out of college, give up my full scholarship at Yale, and move in with him. And as you might imagine, it didn't go well. For 25 years, I was asked about this at least once a week, and I never told the story. I subscribed to the view that many did in those days, and some still do, that if somebody is a big, important person, it is your obligation to protect them. And at the age of 42, I finally decided to publish that memoir, At Home in the World, that told, among other things, that story. And I was pretty much, if you were reading book reviews that fall, I was pretty much universally condemned. It was a brutal experience, and for the writers out there, I want to say, you know, one of the things that is so important is not to let the world tell you who you are. But in this sea of contempt and dismissal and condemnation, the book was called The Worst Book Ever Published by the Washington Post. I was called a predator in the pages of the New York Times for writing about this great man. My dear friend Judy Blume invited me to this festival. And I have to say, it's always a special thing for anybody to be invited to this festival. But that year, it was particularly sweet. And I got on the plane feeling joyful that I was going to get to talk about my book. I had been sort of canceled out in so many quarters. And the day that I was to speak, it was indoors at that point, for reasons we all understand, just as I took the stage, and there was a row of very famous and highly respected writers who I so admired and had so looked forward to speaking with. And just as I took the stage, a row of them walked out en masse and exited the auditorium. And I gave my talk, and I think I did a rather good job. Yep. They never heard it. Obviously, times have changed. And this was pre-Me Too.
Yes.
But I would say that even now, I struggle with the fact that having been publishing work for 50 years, having told many stories, the narrative continues that this defines me, the man I was with when I was 18 years old. And that the idea of telling that story would be viewed as telling too much. And I will say, when Nausgaard does it, he's celebrated for his unblinking courage. When a woman does it, she's being emotional and oversharing.
Yes. But as you say, your relationship with Salinger is a small part of your story.
I'm never uncomfortable talking about it. It's just such a small piece of my life.
But people keep returning to it. Do you think this is related to the way men look at women in relation, or people look at women in relationship to famous men? Why do we define women, either positively or negatively, by the men they are involved with?
Well, we just heard, some really fabulous poetry by one of the award winners about Lee Krasner, a fine painter in her own right, who, decades after her death, is still defined as the wife of Jackson Pollock. This has not ended.
I know, yeah.
All I know to do is to keep on working, to keep on writing. Right. One of the things that was said, Elizabeth, when At Home in the World was published, which was 1998, long time, and the critic for Time magazine said, now that Joyce Maynard has told the only story of any value that she has to tell, the good news is we will never have to hear from her again. And those were fighting words for me. And I think I've published 10 books since then. So we could talk about them.
Yes. Well, in these books, you write stories about love and relationships, about parents and children, subjects that traditionally have been viewed as female topics. Do you think this is another way women are still devalued, or why are these subjects and the places where your subjects are set, small towns, middle class or lower class families, do you consider domestic politics reflective of life on a larger scale, perhaps?
I would say this is insulting not only to women, but to men. The idea that men would not be interested in relationships, love, family, children? What does that say about our vision of men? Yeah. And to me, all of our stories begin with our family. Over the course of my very long career, I've set stories in many different places, but you know, the common thread always is family relationships. And I'm never going to run out of material. Sure. Because our families are our first material. I go back to that well, my own family, and increasingly the families that I invent. Yeah. The most recent novel, as you know, follows one family over the course of 4 decades, yes, from the beginnings of the love affair, the romance between our protagonist and the man she falls in love with in her 20s, the raising of their children, making of a home, and the gradual breakdown of their marriage, partly due to a tragedy that occurs in the family that I won't give away, but yes, she's unable to forgive her husband for it. To me, these are stories that have no gender brand to them.
Did you ever consider writing a novel about a larger social issue, maybe a political novel of something to address some of the issues that are threatening us today?
Oh, you know, I'm a very political person, and yes, I don't even know what it means when somebody says, you know, sometimes the person will say on my Facebook page, I don't want to hear about politics, I'm not interested in politics. Well, if you're interested in your health or your children or your family or your education or your aging or your parents, you're interested in politics. My way of addressing the big issues that I see before us always is with small stories, and it's what I recommend to my students, as you know, to tell the small story as a point of entry to the larger themes. The one story I explore in the new novel, and it's not what the novel is about, but you know, our lives have lots of threads in them. Yes. One of the 3 children in the family never feels comfortable in her body. Right. She doesn't want to wear dresses. She's an uncomfortable child. And she realizes in her late teens and at the beginning of her 20s that she was born in the wrong body and she transitions gender. Yes. This is not a book about, you know, big sort of sexual politics of, you know, gender identity. But I wanted to explore what is increasingly a part of our world. Yes. And I wanted to explore it through the eyes of a mother who initially has difficulty with that and gradually comes to recognize that this wasn't the bad news for her daughter. This was the good news. Her daughter finally got to be who he was meant to be.
And you do address this important topical issue, which leads to my next question.
And I should say, you know, just on that, before we leave that.
No, please.
Publishers today have a person on board who never existed in my earlier days of publishing, called a sensitivity reader. So the most recent book, because the most recent book had a Mexican-American family in it, there was a Latinx sensitivity reader, and because of the gender transition, there was a trans sensitivity reader who came back with very stern words for me that the mother's difficulty in hearing the news that her daughter was going to transition was a transphobic act. Well, I want to say, not just in response to that, but to every writer and reader out here, it is not the job of a writer to give you characters who always behave in the politically exemplary fashion. Right. That's not how people live. And there would not be stories were we to write that way. I wanted to give you a character who grows and changes. In the very short passage that I read, there's one of the kids uses the word retarded. It's not okay to say retarded anymore. But would he have said cognitively challenged? I don't think so. I want my characters to talk the way they would talk.
Absolutely. Well, Joyce, we are all concerned about the current wave of policing writers, many who are now terrified of being canceled or accused of racism or cultural appropriation. On a recent Facebook post, you quote Zadie Smith on the prohibitions currently placed on writers. "What insults my soul is the idea, popular in the country right now, and presented in widely varying degrees of complexity, that we can and should write only about people who are fundamentally like us. Racially, sexually, genetically, nationally," she goes on. Yesterday, a member of the audience, during the talk on male desire and shadow, questioned whether she, as a female white writer, had the authority to write a convincing gay character. Can you expound on this new theory of likeness?
You know, writing fiction is an act of imagination. I write memoir, and when I write memoir, I don't tell everything that happened. I follow a particular quest that I was on. But when I write fiction, I want to go to places I haven't been and explore themes that matter to me. I have to say, I have never once had a black character in a novel of mine. And it troubles me. Sometimes I look, and I was hoping to get my question on this topic to Jamie and Judy yesterday when they were speaking about their work. Does a black reader want to hear my portrayal of a black character? Right. I don't actually think so. Yeah. And I want to do what I can do well. Yeah. That said, I want to go beyond what I've experienced, and I think were we not to have books that did that, the world of fiction would be a very sad and lesser place. It is high time and past time that writers of color and writers of various gender identification be heard. I will support with my last breath the telling of their stories. Yes. But at the same time, we can only tell the story that we burn to tell, plus the leap of imagination. And without that leap of imagination, fiction is dead, as far as I'm concerned.
Good, thank you. Although you have been writing and publishing for 50 years, you have not received any literary awards until this past fall, when France awarded you the Grand Prix for American Literature, the best American book of the year, for Count the Ways. Why is it so different in France? I love France, I'll say. Ooh la la. I think this really does go back to, the old narrative that I was the girlfriend of the famous man. The aging ingenue is another thing that I was called, I think, not too long ago. Love that.
And it used to really bother me. Yeah. And I have to say that when I got this award, I was thrilled out of my mind, because I'd been going to literary festivals for years and seeing everybody's accolades, and I thought, gosh, I've worked pretty hard, and I've done work I'm really proud of. Yeah. I think that we get put in a box, and it's very hard to get out of that box in the eyes of the big literary arbiters, perhaps. Exactly. Not with readers. And I have to say, the people who have sustained me over the years, and I'm saying this right to you all, are readers. They are not the critics. They are not the, prize givers. They are the people who are passionate about books, who will come to Key West even in the middle of a Omicron spike, because you just care about books and reading and writing. And you gave me my life. I mean, I really feel that. So I'm sort of a populist writer. My most recent novel, I'm really proud of, the one that won the prize in France, I had only one review in the entire United States.
Goodness,
but wild. Readers are reading it, and that's really what it's about. Let's not lose track of that.
Absolutely. Your latest novel, The Bird Hotel, is set in Guatemala. You, again, have chosen to publish this in France, but not the United States.
The choice was actually made for me.
Okay.
After I finished Count the Ways, I spent the first 6 months of the pandemic at Lake Atitlan, Guatemala. If you haven't been there, we're in a pretty great place here, but I'll recommend that one as well. And I have had a big part of my life in Guatemala for many years, and I host my writing workshop there.
Which I've had the great privilege.
When I finished Count the Ways, I was so thrilled to be writing uninterruptedly in the way that the pandemic allowed that I just wanted to start another novel. And it was a novel set in a Central American country, and the central character was a white expat woman in that country, not me, but with some of my culture and experience. That book is not publishable in the United States now. It was publishable a year and a half ago, but in the current climate, a white late middle age, I'll say older than late middle age, but I feel younger, writer cannot even set a book in Central America unless she is herself Latin or indigenous. And I go back to saying again, you know, what a loss for readers. Yes. But the great gift was I mailed it off to France, and so kind of this is a new experience, an American writer publishing her work in translation and not in her own language.
And they love you over there.
I had a great time in France, yeah.
That's fantastic. You have enormous self-discipline. For Joyce, the pandemic has been a rich, creative time. Isolated at her home in Guatemala, she finished Count the Ways, and she wrote, again, another complete novel. What keeps you motivated?
Well, I write the story. First of all, I just love to write. Yeah. And I write the stories I want to read. I'm my own first reader. What gets me out of bed and to my laptop in the morning is that I get to spend the day with people who really interest me. And I don't know what's going to happen to them. This is, you know, I think we talked about it in the panel yesterday with Jamie and Lisa. Some people know exactly how their novel's going to end. I never do. And part of what keeps me working so hard is that I want to find out. And my characters bring me to that. The most recent novel, even 20 pages away from the end, I didn't know. I will say also that my work ethic was very much formed by being a single parent of 3 children, and I was in that tiny little group that writing was all I did. I had no day job. I was not teaching. I didn't have a university appointment. I had dropped out of college when I was 18.
Yeah.
There was a very clear link between getting to my laptop and paying for my kids' education, putting food on the table. And so I got to my laptop, and I never viewed it as this big sort of rarefied thing of this tower, this sort of elevated, pure thing that only certain anointed people do. Yeah. I saw myself as a journeyman who got up, journeywoman who got up every morning and went to her job. And her job was to tell a story and to give you the very best story I could. Yeah. And of course, the gratification for me always was hearing back from readers, which has been a big, important part of my life.
Well, Joyce, you regularly host writers' workshops, including the week-long retreats at Guatemala, but also at your home in New Hampshire and occasionally in California. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about the teaching side of your life now, and what it really means to you? What do you think is important for a developing writer?
You know, I've worked with writers of all different levels, Elizabeth.
Right.
When you came to work with me, you had obviously studied a lot and you were at an advanced level. But I really love when I get somebody absolutely fresh out of the gate. And usually they'll say, oh, I'm not really a writer. And then they'll define whether or not they're a writer by whether they've ever published work. That's not my definition of what makes you a writer. I want My teaching, which began about when I published At Home in the World, is absolutely informed by my own experience of being told I had no right to tell my story. Nobody should have to be given permission, but I've decided I will be the permission giver and say to every single person who sits in the chair around that circle, there's one story nobody can take from you and that only you can tell, and it is your own. You own that story. And if somebody is telling you, shut up, close your mouth, oversharing, that's their problem. They can live that way, but they cannot make you do the same. I just saw, Ben was indicating question time, maybe, and I always love this, so I hope nobody will be shy. Oh, 10 before.
10 minutes to...
Yeah, no, so we want to hear from you.
Yes.
There's somebody in the back there. I have to say, you know, my one complaint about this line of work that I've been doing since I was 18 years old is that it's very unsociable. And I'm actually rather a sociable person. And I don't, you know, a performer gets to see the audience, but I don't see people reading my books. So it is such a treat to hear back.
Yeah.
And I've missed that during these. Yes, what's your name?
My name's Christine. And thank you. That was a really illuminating conversation, lots to think about. My question for you is, has any topic emotionally felt difficult or impossible for you to write about, and have you tried to overcome that? Do you have any strategies for that, or have any topics still remain sort of off limits because they're too emotionally difficult?
I could almost say the more difficult it is to write about, probably the more important it is to write about. You know, it won't feel uncomfortable writing about how cute your kitten is or how beautiful the sunset. It's when you get to those areas of discord, discomfort, pain, that you have to do the counterintuitive thing, which is to dive right into the wave. The book that I published before this new one was a memoir called The Best of Us. It's the story of finding and then very shortly after losing my very good second husband, Jim, to pancreatic cancer. We met in our late 50s, and he died 4.5 years later. I could not be selective about what I told in that story. And I trusted the reader, I trusted you, to go to the hard truths. And readers actually never disappoint me that way. I hear a voice, I don't see the person. Oh, good.
Hello, I'm Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Hi there. I wonder if somebody told you here from the establishment that this latest novel of yours...
Could you take your mask off just to ask the question? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Okay, thank you. Did somebody tell you that your latest novel was not publishable here? And,
yes.
And could you have, based on your reputation, forced your latest novel to be published here? And you decided not to publish it here because you might not have wanted to kick another story? No,
it actually, I was told by my editor, with whom I'd worked for many years, that my publisher could not publish this book. And I actually didn't even, I don't particularly fault her. They might have made a braver move, but I didn't want the real meat of that story deflected by a conversation about appropriation. I felt that I think that book is going to be published in the U.S. I think right now we're in a moment of great overcorrection, and the pendulum will swing again somewhat, and the book will be there when it does. But the decision was made for me that I could not write a book set in Central America. That was pretty much made for me. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. You're a very creative, imaginative, and...
I'm looking for where you are.
I'm right here. I'm over here.
Okay, yes, hi.
And it's hard for me to stand up, that's why I'm sitting
Okay.
there. So I consider you to be a very creative, imaginative, and disciplined person. But I wonder if is there any specific set of relationships or events or authors that have had the what has had the greatest influence on your writing is what I'm getting at.
I would say, I mean, of course, I could, name writers that I've loved. I would say it is the experience of being in a family that has shaped me. The very thing that made it hardest for me to get to my computer, or it used to be typewriter, was the thing that gave me the stories to tell. All the tangles, all the complications that are so different from the picture of what family is going to be. And I go back to that one again and again. I guess I will add that as a teacher of memoir, I am constantly moved by my students' stories, and I will never take anybody's story and appropriate it into a book of mine. I did one time, with the permission of a student, I asked if I could use some elements of her story in a novel. It was a novel of mine called After Her. But I would never appropriate. But those stories have informed me, and I think given me, I feel so lucky. It's as if I've been a world traveler who's gotten to go to every country of the world. I have heard probably 1,000 women and some men tell stories they've never told to anybody else before. I consider that a sacred trust, and it has made me a better writer and a better person.
We have time for one more.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Joyce. My name's Alan. And I heard you say your definition of a writer, what wasn't your definition of a writer, but maybe it was my old man ears that I missed. Either you thought it was obvious, or you didn't go forward and say, what is your definition of being a writer?
Of being a writer. I think a writer, in one way or another, is a person who takes us on a journey, who, I always say when I'm teaching students, you're creating a road trip. Because I was born in the state of New Hampshire and got myself to California, I always picture the map, and I picture New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, New York, and I'll sometimes say to somebody about their story, oh, I think we're right about Ohio now in your story, or we're at the Rocky Mountains, which is usually the big sort of shift. I want to know that at the end of the road trip that is your piece of writing, whether it is a 350-page novel or a 10-page short story or a poem or a song, that I have discovered something I didn't know at the beginning. And a writer reveals truths. And the minute we try to be pretty or writerly or polite, not hurt anybody's feelings, worry about our mother, that road trip that you're taking me on has been compromised. The very moments that you say, oh, I could never tell that, it's too embarrassing, are in fact the moments that will most connect you to a reader, because the reader also has their very embarrassing moments, and they feel very alone. So I guess I'll say one of the things that matters to me about being a writer, and I know exactly where this comes from, actually. It comes from growing up in an alcoholic family and believing, where my father's drinking was never discussed, and believing for my entire childhood that I was the only person on the face of the earth whose father did this thing of getting drunk. And I adored my father, but there was enormous shame to that. And I felt an enormous isolation. I had to keep the secret. For me, if I were to name one thing that has propelled me into the work that I've done for the last 50 years, it is to break that sense of shame and isolation and talk about the things we don't talk about, and take a reader into my world in a way that allows him or her or them to feel, oh, I'm not alone. That's a good writer to me.